Our student leadership team have Rosenberg jackets on, so if any questions about all the artifacts, you can also ask them specifically, and they are the ones who are also hosting and moderating today. So if you are one of the speakers and you have a question beforehand, and you see one of them, can we all stand up quickly? Leadership team. Yes, you'll find them in these beautiful Rosenberg College jackets. Those are your go-tos. Amongst, of course, all the other wonderful students who have joined us. They all have wonderful stories, and you will see more of them later on in the student sprints. But without further ado, second drum roll, please, for our next guest.
Dr. Professor Menor Kapoor, we're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
I got a bit of echo with this microphone. I think you had it earlier too.
That's right.
So for those new to your book, Productive Failure, which we have it right here, we both read it, we love it. Can you give us a little insight on what productive failure really is and what is it not?
Thank you. So thanks for the drum roll. That's my first drum roll of my career. So very special drum roll. Thank you. What is productive failure? So the idea simply is that if we learn from failures and errors, if you say the failure can be a compelling mechanism for learning, why do we wait for it to happen? Why can't we intentionally design for it? So when you're about to learn something new, the typical way usually is that somebody or something will tell you, explain to you what it is. And there's a whole bunch of science around how that is not the most optimal way of learning something new. So what I developed in my research was a protocol to activate your cognitive system using failure-based problem solving. And that prepares you to then learn from an expert or a teacher or instruction later on. So this is a combination of, failure-based, intentionally designing for failure initially, and then bootstrapping that for learning deeply. And then the rest of it is science, basically empirically demonstrating how, when, and why it works.
Well, that was amazing. I think he also had a question.
So I have my own kind of question on productive failure with AI. Do you think that since AI is most of the time right, do you think it's going to take the aspect of failing away in general, not just inside the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just AI, it's with any tool. When you're learning something new, the principle is that the bulk of the cognitive effort should be on the learner, right? And if it's not there, then if something else is doing the effort or the thinking, that's the thing that's learning, not you. So whether you're using calculators, when you're first coming to learn, say, multiplication or arithmetic operations, and you're overly reliant on calculators, these things existed a long time ago. These machines, maybe you still have them. Then you would not learn these operations. The same thing if you're using AI to write. You will not learn how to write, even though you may be able to produce good products. So I make this distinction between, also in the book, between learning, your learning space, and your performance space. In the learning space, by definition, you're in the space where you currently don't have the skill sets and abilities. And so you've got to put in the effort to learn that. So their failure is normal, their struggle is normal, and so on and so forth. Tools in that space, to the extent that tools in that space, you're allowed to.
You can just talk.
Yeah.
We're testing productive failure right now.
So you're allowed to use tools in that space to the extent that those tools do not do the cognitive work. They can support you, but they shouldn't be the ones doing the cognitive work, because that's your job, right? So that's your learning space. Performance space is when you already have your skill sets and abilities, and you're trying to amp it up. Right? This is where you're exploiting, for example, your skills and capabilities. Here, failure is not desirable. Here, tools can be used to, amp your productivity, amp your performance, and so on and so forth. So if you're a surgeon, you're operating, failure is a no-go, right? Ideally, right? Or if they want to use tools to really make the surgery even more successful, by all means. So we need to distinguish between this learning space and the performance space. And tools that improve performance or productivity initially may not be as good for deep learning if you're in the wrong space.
So in the learning space that you're discussing, how do you think we can culture safety for people so that they almost want to fail, they want to try to fail instead of relying on artificial intelligence to check their answer or to give them the correct answer? Because, I mean, currently, I feel like as a new generation, we struggle with wanting to turn in a homework assignment or an assignment that has not been checked by artificial intelligence because we fear this failure, and especially when our peers might be also using this, so we feel this pressure to also use it.
That's a great question. It's not just happening here; it's happening in the entire space, and it's like a collective doom. You're collectively under determining what deep learning can happen in code. So maybe it requires a collective contract. Maybe it requires an awareness that we should all be changing or creating safe spaces within. These things can happen, and the more both students and teachers and heads of departments and school leaders and company CEOs realize this, I think that's where we start to build these cultures. Right?
I agree, yes. On that note, where do people misunderstand it most? Like, when is failure good? I know you talked about it a bit with the learning space versus actually performance, but can you expand on that with another example?
So, first of all, we must rule out failure that is out of laziness, stupidity. I think I said that earlier. That's not the failure we're talking about. I'm also not in productive failure. I'm also not talking about the failure that happens in high-stakes assessments and exams, right? Okay, that happens and we can learn from it. The failure that I'm talking about is the failure that you want to design for in the initial learning. Something came on. In the initial learning, so that you learn that thing deeply in a way that when you need to perform, failure is reduced. So you're basically fighting failure when it matters with failure when it's safe, right? And you can apply that to just about every aspect of when you're trying to learn something versus when you're trying to perform. Yeah.
On that note, like in my science classroom, for example, we have productive failure where we do assignments first without prior knowledge, and then he tells us how to actually do everything. But in other classrooms, that's not the case, and for most students, that's not the case. So how would you say students can implement productive failure into their lives outside of school? Because you can't really change what's happening inside of school. You can't change the school system.
Well, I think you can change a lot inside the school system. At ATH, I run a course. I used to run a course until I took on extra duties called The Science of Learning from Failure. And it was an open elective for all bachelor students. And they will all come in, classes of about 30 students each, and we used to discuss the science of learning, right, and learning from failure. Sidetrack, the whole education system is designed with the thinking that learners know what good learning looks like. Let me repeat that. We make the assumption that learners know what good learning looks like. And it turns out it doesn't. That's a false assumption. So first thing is when I share the science of learning with some of these very smart students like you, they get it. And then they start to ask that question. Why isn't my professor teaching this way? Right? Back to the point now, I think you have enough power even within, as you understand the science of learning, as you communicate, as you build your community, as students, you can actually go to your teachers and say, hey, evidence-based, come on. Yeah, teach us the way the science says deep learning happens. So push from within to change your, sorry teachers, don't hate me for it, but you can create the momentum. And outside you have many more degrees of freedom. Where depending on what you want to learn, I dedicate a whole chapter, and the last chapter of the book is entirely about how you can design for productive failure for yourself. But even there you have to be aware, what are the things you really want to learn deeply, right? Whether it's learning how to, cook, to paint, or to do public speaking, or whatever it is, right? And for those things you design for productive failure, whereas for other things where perhaps you don't need it as much, you can still, carve out the most efficient path, so to speak.
That was great. I forgot the microphone isn't working for a second.
You just didn't need to use it because otherwise people don't get
Yes.
it.
So then,
We still need to
Yeah,
use
you
it.
need to use it.
Even if it doesn't work.
Okay.
Okay,
So-
maybe you, yeah.
Based off your social economic level, some people can't really afford to fail in business while others can.
Mm.
Do you think that productive failure is based off your social economic standing? Like say for instance, people with higher like net worths and richer parents, they can afford to fail through a new start for starting a new business, while people with less fortunate parents can't because they need to come on debt to actually start a business. Do you think that productive failure favors some people rather than others?
So, can we retrospectively call a phenomena productive failure? Yes, in the entrepreneurial world you can't. Again, I must, circumscribe the phenomena that I'm talking about. I'm talking productive failure as a capability you develop by designing learning environments so that everybody whose learning is in this way develops the ability to fail, pivot, and develop resilience and creativity. So by the time you come out of schooling or universities, you're into your SES should not matter. Or should not matter as, I think it will always matter, but it should not matter as much as had you not done anything. Is it true that, there's research that has come out of, you remember the famous marshmallow experiment?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, they threw marshmallows for the kid, and
Yeah.
then you get another marshmallow.
You've heard that story, right? Kids who could delay the gratification, right? Do you also know the sub-story of that?
No.
The kids who could delay the gratification,
Yeah.
they tended to come from wealthier people, wealthier families. So that's a very popular experiment that people tell stories about, but really more research suggests that it's actually confounded by their SES. So if you're a rich kid, yeah, you'll find it easy to delay gratification, obviously, right? So where was I going with that? So yeah, in implementing productive failure in the schooling, in the education years, in a way that builds capacity all of us, I think that's the important point. Yeah.
Also, let's say this is more about the entrepreneurial world. What'd you say if productive failure has a huge toll on your mind and you're losing money from it? Do you think it's still worth it rather than just giving up or trying something else?
Pivoting is an important decision, right? So it's you don't go down a path, and it's a tricky balance between how far you want to go before you pivot, right? There's no science to it. It's about how much risk you want to take, your personal individual capabilities as well, the context within which you're operating. There are notions that we tend to hold on to our losses, and I talk about that, losses more than our successes. So if you're making a loss, you're more likely to persist in that strategy and say, maybe it'll change. And in the entrepreneurial world, that could be quite detrimental. So knowing some psychology of decision making and how people make decisions about losses and successes can actually help you deal with that complexity of when to pivot, but nobody can tell you exactly. That's the point. And then, as Adnan says, if it leads to failure and you learn from it, well, you implement it in your next project. So it's still productive in the end.
Talking about pivoting, I think we're going to open up to the room for questions and answers if we have enough time. Sophia, do we have enough time? We do? Does anyone have a question for our lovely professor regarding productive failure? Paul, okay. Yeah, Paul.
Drum roll for that.
Yeah, we need a drum roll. That's amazing.
So, in a safe learning space, as you described it, is every failure a productive failure, or are there also failures that don't lead to anything at all?
Yeah. So, as I say, if it's a genuine attempt at trying something and that's not working out, yes, that could be a productive failure. But if failure happens because you were lazy or incompetent or careless, and that happens, so don't beat yourself too much about it. That happens. The chances are you might learn from it in other ways that may not be productive.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Maeve, okay.
I was just wondering if you had any tips on kind of getting over the fear of failure. Like, I know that's kind of what's keeping me from really maximizing the productivity of my failure.
Yeah. So you can't learn swimming unless you jump into the water, right? Like there's no amount of theory that will tell you or prepare you for the what. You have to jump in, okay? And the strange thing happens when you jump in. You know, you don't feel, you struggle with it, but then you get used to it. And remember, what happens the next time you jump in? It's a bit easier. So you know that you're going to struggle again with something, but it becomes a little easier. And the next time. So in other words, what we think is our initial fear of failure is just an initial fear of failure, and that is something, knowing that you can change it by acting upon it, is a very powerful strategy. So, there's even in psychology of motivation or fear, we think that, you've got to solve for the motivation or the fear first, and then you act upon it. That's kind of the traditional model. Some people can do it and others can't because they have higher thresholds of motivation or lower fear. But the other side is also true. Action drives motivation. Action drives your ability to reduce your levels of fear. So if in doubt, and if it's in a safe space, act. And that will help you. Not only do it again and again, but each time you learn how to cope with it. So now, for example, if I take on something hard, like writing this book, as I was sharing with some of you, this was an entirely new genre of writing. This is not scientific writing. It's writing for the general public. I've never done this in my life. I'm an engineer, a statistician, and a learning scientist. I've never done something like this. But the last 3-4 years, I did exactly this. New space, every time I take on something new now, I know I'm going to struggle, A. The threshold is a lot lower. I know I can overcome it quite easily. And that's something you need to develop. It's not going to happen in the first step. But it's malleable, is the point.
Well, thank you so much. That was amazing. Do we have any more questions? Sophia.
Hi, so a previous speaker in a conversation with you mentioned successful failure. Would you say that successful failure and productive failure are similar things? And if so, is this kind of a skill that you can develop in life?
I mean, part of my answer to that question was, yes, you can develop this, the resilience, the changing your thresholds for fear of failure, lowering your thresholds for action, persistence through failure, resilience, creativity that comes with it. Pivoting, and also then developing the capacity of knowing when to pivot. It also comes with action. These are all things that you can learn as you go along. Part of the argument why I put productive failure is we need to bring the building of this capacity into the education system so that kids learn from day one how they do. Actually, let me backtrack. Kids already have it. If you look at how a child learns, preschool, they try to, say a word, how they learn language, how they get up to walk. They just fail, they get up and they try something else, and then fail and they get up and they try something. So this capability to learn from productive failure is built into us, because that's how we learn everything just about. Schooling does something to us, right? And I think part of this sort of advocacy and intervention is, let's change that. Let's build on those capacities. To your question about how is successful failure different from productive failure, I'll have to have a conversation with Adnan exactly how he defines successful failure as opposed to a general term, and then we can have a discussion about that.
Okay, if I can ask one more really quick question that I was wondering. So the thing is that right now, still not many educational facilities practice the theory of productive failure. But theoretically, how would you go about helping other people kind of change their mindset? If they were raised in a mindset where failure was always seen as bad, no matter whether it was productive or not, how do they kind of manage to get out of that view of the world?
Sometimes you have to take, the person who's keen to swim, take them to the pool and jump with them. Yes, you have to act. I've had so many teachers who've told me, like when I say, let's do productive failure with your children, with your students, and they say, no, I don't think they're capable of this, they're not capable of that. And I said, watch me. And then we actually do it, and one of the things they are most surprised, more than the students themselves, is, oh, I did not know I could do this. Right? And once they see that, I think that's when mindsets start to change. So again, you may be able to change mindsets in a logical, rational discourse, and I think that's essential as maybe a starting point. but there is nothing like jumping in the water.
Thank you so much.
So speaking of jumping in the water, what was a time of like your most successful productive failure that you had?
I'm still searching.
You're still searching, so you
Most-
haven't had a productive failure yet.
No, so I think in terms of life experiences, I don't know how. I don't know. So my first love, what I wanted to do in my life, was to play professional football. Okay, I played professional football for about 6 years in my life, and by football I mean not soccer. Yeah, it's the correct word is football. So professional football, and I moved countries by myself. I was in India at 16. I moved countries by myself. Moved to Singapore, just to do that, and third year in college, I broke my knee and had 4 surgeries on it. And the surgeon said, if you want to walk, you might consider another career. And I chose another career. And had you asked me, this was 30 years ago, 35 years ago, did I want to be a professor, pontificating and writing books? No chance. I became from a professional football player to a professor. That's a very long journey. You can think about all the different steps that I took. After engineering, I was an entrepreneur. That also failed. It was a .com era where everybody went into the internet. That also failed. And I joined the industry as a management consulting. Didn't like it at all. Then I went into teaching. And in teaching, I taught poor income kids, not for some, big reasons about, I want to change the world. I was broke. So I went and taught kids, just to make, just to keep afloat. But I loved teaching. But then I realized I wasn't a very good teacher. So, I was touching 30, and all my peers were, already established lawyers and doctors and engineers. And I had everything that I tried, from football to engineering to entrepreneurship to, etc. Everything had failed. And I joke about it. I says, what should a rational person do then? They become an academic. And that's the idea. And somehow academia stuck. I think I'm a reasonably successful scientist, but it's all on the back of all of the other things that I've learned and things that make me a different kind of a learning scientist are basically predicated on all these experiences. In a very broad way, I think I could say that's my productive failure.
That was a very motivational story, and your expertise in science is very well known, so it shows that no matter your story, you can get there in the end.
Absolutely.
So this has been an amazing panel. Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I feel like we need to have your